Jupiter-Saturn in Aquarius cycle, December 21st, 2020 to November 20th, 2030. This video I've just created for you can be understood as part 3 to a series of videos that I created back in 2020 regarding that very historic and important conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn that occurred at 0 degrees Aquarius on Winter Solstice of that year. Wow, that really got the attention of the astrologers the world over for very good reason. Now, the whole idea of showing you this is because here now in late August 2024, we just recently experienced the first square between Jupiter and Saturn stemming from that conjunction. The conjunction is symbolic of the beginning of any cycle. A conjunction is when two planets from our perspective here on Earth appear to be in the same longitude, so they're considered conjunct, or in the same, united. They're like a new moon. Okay, so the beginning of that conjunction was very important because Aquarius can be understood, the 11th sign of the zodiac, as the sign of humanity, symbolic of collective realities, and very much of the revolutions of evolution. When you get deeper into the symbolic understanding of Aquarius and its ruling planets, Saturn and Uranus, you get into a deeper understanding of that. There's this principle of what we call the revolutions of evolution, which means that, change is the law and everything's always moving along dynamically. And we come to these places along the way, which can be called critical junctures, critical turning points. And the critical turning points are, again, revolutionary. So the planets reveal the placement of them like in a cosmic sense, and the synchronicity is that reality playing itself out on Earth. Now, we live in, unique times in terms of human history because with modern technology, we've kind of basically are rapidly moving towards what I generally refer, and others have, to a global village. The internet has, in effect, kind of indirectly at least, is and has serving to dissolve boundaries and borders that previously existed, which were always artificial anyway, but they kind of, I guess you could say, served their purpose, drawing lines between nations, and it gave rise to the rise of national identities, etc., which we now understand as what the world is. But it, of course, is itself subject to change. And here we are undergoing the next major one. Now, in these slides, I'm going to show you, the first one is so there's a series of slides that just look like this. And I basically stripped away all the planets from the chart. So we do have Jupiter here, it's like this number 4, and Saturn's like an H with a cross. There they are, and that's the conjunction. And I'm including the Sun and Moon kind of more as a background secondary perspective, but the Sun and Moon in astrology are known as the luminaries, like the king and queen. So they're kind of good to keep present all the time. The major thing to understand about Jupiter and Saturn, they're what's called the social planets. In astrology, the personal planets are Sun, Moon, which are not technically planets. We generally couple them or group them with Venus, Mercury, and Mars, known as the personal or inner planets. Then there's Jupiter, Saturn, the social planets, and then Uranus, Neptune, Pluto would be called the transsocial planets. Jupiter and Saturn cycles are 20 years in duration, and they have been recognized over many, many years, millennia in fact, but for many, many years, being very closely associated with global economy or economies around the world, economic cycles. Okay, so we're specifically interested in economic cycles. But of course, the economy is always tied to larger social realities. So, economy, politics, social trends, and so forth must generally be understood as all features of the same dynamic. All right. Now, what you're seeing here is this date of December 21st, 2020, Winter Solstice, but we're 1 minute prior to the Sun entering Capricorn. So I'm going to show you that in the next slide. You'll see here the Sun at 29, Sagittarius 59. So when I advance the slide by 1 minute, which I just did, Now, the sun is at 0 Capricorn and a bit of minutes, but the main thing is we jumped to see that it's still December 21st, 2020, but this is at 6:20 p.m., and that's exactly when Jupiter and Saturn were conjunct. Okay, that's exactly the minute when they formed their exact conjunction at 0 degrees Aquarius, 29 minutes. So the point I wanted to illustrate is that, yes, it was exactly just hours after the official start or moment of winter solstice, which in astrology occurs when the sun enters the sign of Capricorn in what we call the tropical zodiac. The zodiac, which I generally refer to as the zodiac of the sun's light, as opposed to that of the constellations. It's important to note that there is more than one zodiac. There's basically 3 zodiacs. Okay, we're not going to get into that too much, but there's the constellational, there's the tropical, and then there's the other one, which is the third one, which is the aspect of the fact that the constellations are not all the same size. The sidereal zodiac presents the constellations as all the same size. So the third one is the astronomical zodiac. It's actually called, all the constellations are different sizes. So there's a whole world of discussion to be said about that. I'm not going to get into it right now. Western astrology is the tropical zodiac, and it's based on the sun's light, which is anchored in the sun cycle, which begins every year with the winter solstice. Okay, that's a very important understanding when you want to understand Western astrology. Now, we're going to jump into looking at the next slide, which brings us from that particular date of the exact conjunction back in 2020 to now, late August 2024, when we have the first of 3 squares. The square is a 90-degree aspect. Saturn by this time has what's called the synodic cycle, is where the 2 planets that form a conjunction are themselves, of course, in motion. So it takes, so even though they enter new signs, their anchor point was when they were conjunct. Then this being just shy of 4 years later, of course, both Jupiter and Saturn have moved along into new signs, and they are forming this exact conjunction, but it still relates back to the exact degree of the conjunction at 0 Aquarius. So this first one of 3 squares is very important, because the square is really when the whole deeper dynamic of the conjunction begins to get really hot. It's when it really begins to enter its verb cycle, when it really begins to reveal more strongly the outer changes implied. Okay, the process between the conjunction and the square has all along been occurring. It's almost like the germination of plants becoming flowers and then fruit on the vine. It's that kind of with the square is like, there's the fruit on the vine, there's like the full bloom of the flower. It's actually the flower that we know will become the fruit. Okay, so it's a sort of an organic perspective of how to understand that. So we're going to see how this first, August 19th, is the first of the 3. Then the second was occurs. Oh, and by the way, I wanted to show you it. On August 19th, that very day, there was a full moon in Aquarius. That's what I wanted to show you here. So you see this at 6:26 p.m. The square has not technically exactly occurred yet on this day, but the full moon occurs. So in this next slide, the exact square occurs, and interestingly enough, the moon is at the critical 29th degree of Aquarius. That's somewhat significant because the 29th degree is known as a critical degree. It's a degree of overcoming. So it kind of suggests, okay, everybody, we have some work to do. This whole dynamic of changing like national economies to a global economy principle, which is not going to happen overnight. it does extend to a much longer reach of time. And I'm going to show you here, as I said, the first half of the 20-year cycle, the first 10 years, when the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction turns into an opposition, what we call a 180-degree opposition aspect. That's when it really culminates to its higher kind of stress point. And even then, the whole process of translating from national economies to global economy, which is, I believe, is what generally is there to occur. Now, I'm not 100% sure. It looks likely. It's not that I specifically want that to be the case. It's not a bias of perspective. It's just an assessment of probability that we're undergoing this very important evolutionary dynamic because of modern technology and the global village principle. Okay, so this is the whole idea. Now, so in August 19th, there was the exact moment of the square with the moon just after the full moon having moved to the critical degree. I thought that was very serendipitous, very telling of what we're likely to be dealing with here. And what that generally includes is a kind of a very dynamic process, which will require patience, faith, and creative adaptation. Really, those words come to mind, at least. So then by December 24th, winter, like Christmas Eve, actually, just after winter solstice, there'll be the second of the 3 squares. Okay, so December 24th. I'll be talking about these in my weekly horoscope. And then by June 15th, 2025, we'll have the last of the 3 squares. You'll notice that in the first one, Saturn was retrograde. Jupiter was direct. This little R means retrograde. In the second one, it's Jupiter that's retrograde, and that's why they do have a triple square dynamic because of the retrograding of planets. Okay, it's important to understand that basic principle, or useful at least. And then by the third one, no, neither one are retrograde. And so interestingly, that one occurs at 2:22 p.m. The last one, that's kind of a little serendipity itself in terms of numerology numbers a bit. But more importantly now, from there, we can jump all the way till 2029. Okay, so what you're seeing now, again, how interesting is this? Winter solstice 2029, the sun has just not long before entered Capricorn, and when it did, the moon was full. So there will be a full moon in Cancer on December 21st, technically, 2029, when winter solstice occurs, and less than a day later, there'll be a Jupiter-Saturn opposition. The opposition, again, is the 180 degrees, it's the next major juncture. So the reason I'm showing you that, and Saturn, again, you'll see is retrograde, and because it's when the whole dynamic culminates. So I just want to give you a little look down the road to kind of get a clear, sort of measured sense of when this whole dynamic will enter its next phase. So when we're at the square, which itself has just begun, the first of 3 in August 2024, then late December 2024, then June 2025. So it's just shy of a year, like about a 10-month period during which we're in this first critical square, kind of almost crisis. Squares are very edgy, very dynamic, very energetic, kind of higher intensity. So, and it's very pivotal, very decisive. It's very forward moving, very verb-like. Okay, the square. So there's all kinds of ways you can describe it, but it's high stress verb action. It's like very busy kind of traffic in a city at rush hour, if you like. Okay, lots of horns beeping and things going on and sirens, if you like. It's just very active, very dynamic, high intensity, and admittedly that does include stress. Now, So that we're in that now, and I just want you to be aware so it can help you to both observe and see the synchronicities and also to understand better what's going on. So you have a little bit of, support by this to not be in, reaction and, despair and, kind of blind fear, if you like. So then this next major leap all the way to the end of the decade is there because we have the opposition. It's the midpoint approximately of the entire cycle. And then it overlaps, interestingly, into April of April 24th, 2030 to be exact, where we have the second of the three oppositions, and then the third and final one of the Jupiter-Saturn opposition, November 20th, 2030. So we're really looking at this, 6+ year dynamic, and it continues for another 10 years. You need to understand it's a 20-year cycle. So when you get that, you're really clear. You realize, okay, so this is a really powerful, big revolution of evolution. Symbol Aquarius is the sign of revolution, you see, and revolutionary change. Saturn is the traditional co-ruler, and it's kind of like the only one truth in life, as the saying goes, is change, linked to Saturn, the lord of time in astrology. But Uranus is like the revolutionary impulse that comes in and invariably on the Earth playing field manifests as synchronicities of various players, various events engaged in the dynamic of the revolutionary shifting. And it can be kind of pretty brutal sometimes, it's not pretty change, very renovation oriented, very aggressive, very, kind of fatal in some respects, but not in the ultimate sense. But certainly often the revolutions of evolution include various degrees of casualty, right? It's not easy to go through these changes. We have to break from the old, and there tends to be a traditional notion. We need to maintain or make it what it was is in that. So that's the issue. And so basically there you go. We're seeing this scope of the first 10 years, and I'm saying it all because we're in this time of the Jupiter-Saturn first square stemming from the conjunction that happened on that historic December 21st, 2020 date at 0 degrees Aquarius. And that was what made it. It would have been significant anyway, already, just the next Jupiter-Saturn square. But the fact that it occurred on Winter Solstice and at 0 degrees of Aquarius, the revolutionary sign, wow, you can imagine why we're kind of excited and interested, intrigued, and, a little bit also wary that, wow, this is powerful. It's one thing to be intellectually intrigued, and there's another thing to have your feet on the ground and to be, ready to deal with the realities. But when you have this wider cosmic archetypal destiny perspective that I'm sharing with you, you can at least have some added measure of support to not feel like it's just not the world going to hell in a handbasket type of thing. There's a rhyme and reason, time and season to these things, and that's what astrology is all about. That's true on an individual level, but it's also true collectively. And the collective perspective is what's known as the mundane astrology, actually. It's what's described as. And it's more of a generic perspective, and then we usually, in more, practice, we want to apply those principles to any given individual, but we can look at the generic mundane perspective to gain a more collective sense of what's going on. So there's kind of two ways of looking at it. Invariably, we have to apply it to individuals or, whether nations or people, to get the nitty gritty. But when we see the generic perspective like we're doing here, we at least get a sense of, okay, right, this is the, general perspective where the planets are, and the synchronicities will invariably play themselves out on the world. And as we now are moving progressively from, isolated nationalities, generally speaking, to a more collective reality, as we see with the internet in particular. That's the tying common denominator, and by the way, it just so happens that the internet and computers and all this high technology with satellites, etc., are all linked to the sign of Aquarius. Okay, so Aquarius is the sign that's symbolically associated with all of that. And all of this comes within the context, I want to add this one last little bit, of what's called the Age of Aquarius. The Age of Aquarius, we've been in the dawning of the Age of Aquarius. We've all heard that song. We all kind of get the basic notion since about 1920, when the League of Nations, created a kind of a whole new perspective on the world, which then evolved itself into the UN, the United Nations. So we're, just past 100 years since that began, and we're at this very dynamic juncture. And according to my studies, and I'll bring more attention to this over the coming weeks into the fall of 2024 here, of what really amounts to be the sunrise moment of the Age of Aquarius, which it does so happen, not just so happens to occur in 2030 or Winter Solstice 2029. And I've created a whole analysis of that in a very detailed way, and all this can be seen as a piece of that entire perspective. So it stands on its own, but it's also a part of that larger time frame and understanding of what the Age of Aquarius implies and when it occurs and what are the pivotal turning points in time. And we're definitely in one of them right now, and just got activated by that conjunction. We can kind of link it to the new moon that occurred in Leo on the 4th of August, and then right at the full moon, boom, we had the exact square. So you can always link it back to the new moon. That's the first context, only about 29 and a half days, so it all fits in. So I'm going to show you one more video, though, of a more animated version of what I just showed you in a more complex way, but you've seen the still frames here, so you have a general understanding of what we're talking about, the movement of the Jupiter and Saturn from their conjunction to the square, 90-degree midpoint, then to the opposition, what we call the culmination, symbolic of like a full moon. That's because the sun and moon are 180 degrees when the moon's full. So when two planets are 180 degrees, we call it opposition, symbolic of like a full moon, which also, of course, implies, as the square does, higher stress points, higher activations, kind of new beginning, turning points, critical junctures. Those words and phrases describe it basically. So there you go. You've got some insight and you've got something to work with, something to understand. And let me show you now in context to the other two videos that I encourage you to watch to really get a much clearer understanding yet. And you'll see if you do watch them, you'll really get it. And then we will also, there'll be more to come to add to this, but for now, you'll have that context. But watch this video, this last part, where I'll animate the whole story. It'll be a bit more dizzying, but you already have the foundation, so don't worry about it. And so here we go. Okay, so here we are again looking at the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, but all the planets are present now. Okay, so we have the bigger picture, but I'm going to keep it with Saturn anchored on the ascendant. Okay, so whatever degree Saturn is at, or sign or degree, the same will be true of the ascendant, but it will help to not create such a dizzying picture. And I've got it at a high speed, but 1 day per second or a little faster than that. So here we go. Watch. The moon in particular will move very quickly, but what we're after in particular, and I might stop it when Jupiter comes into square. Okay, so we're going to just let it run a bit, and then you'll see the whole dynamic of the planets just for extra little entertainment. Okay, so you see the moon moves very quickly. That's it. The sun is moving rather quickly. All the minor planets here, Mars moving along, right? There's Jupiter moving. It's relatively slow pace, it appears, and it's turned retrograde. Saturn's retrograde, and by 2021, And they, of course, this is the dance of the planets. So it gives you this a little bit of an illustration of a dynamic process that astrology reveals. I like to remind people that, astrology is a living science. The planets are always in motion. That motion, that cyclic dynamic, animates, and especially when you compile all the planets and you understand this is what astrologers are looking at in generally the generic sense, just where are the planets on any given day. So by this time, Jupiter is 2023 has advanced to Taurus, and Saturn by this time is in Pisces, and it's retrograding, and it goes back, and it's sat at Pisces there at the end of December 2023, but then, continues. So Saturn and Jupiter is our main thing we're looking at once again. And I know it's a bit dizzying, it's a bit hard to kind of know exactly what's going on, but we're going to just pause for a second. So I just brought it to August 14th. I'm going to actually bring it just back a little bit to August 4th. The reason I'm going to do that is there was a new moon in Leo. You see that? Now we're in August. So as we go forward, we're going to come to what would be about the 17th, when there's basically on this chart, it shows there's a full moon in Aquarius. Okay, actually on the 19th. On the 19th, there's the full moon in Aquarius. And this is where the Jupiter-Saturn, Jupiter at 17, Saturn at 17. Now, the deeper story is on the 14th, there was a Jupiter-Mars conjunction. A lot of astrologers were talking about that validly. Okay, so that's the first square I wanted to show you. We'll just continue. We're going to go to about December 24th here. So you see all the planets. So you can look at it in any which way you want, but you kind of get a contextual perspective here. And there it is. There's the second one, Jupiter and Saturn at 14 degrees. And so, yeah, I just wanted you to again see the bigger story here. But we can isolate the two planets like I did in the slides, and then we're moving all the way till June here, and I'm going to stop it about here, June 15th, when we have the last of the square dynamic. So as I mentioned, that's the time period during which we can, starting now, at the new moon in Leo approximately, then the full moon in Aquarius that stemmed from that conjunction, and then wow, we're in this very dynamic Jupiter-Saturn square period. And, we know that there's important elections occurring in the United States and elsewhere in the world during this time, maybe even in Canada. If not this year, next year. But it's all but those are themselves, in light of what we're talking about, somewhat secondary, but not really. Especially in the United States, because the United States dollar is the strongest on the planet, right? The US dollar principle, and with this whole dynamic going on, with so much going on the world scene, especially in the United States, with the very important election coming up, etc., and the fact that the economy is under duress globally, but certainly true in the United States, recession and so forth, and so that's why. And again, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction and cycle is all about economic trends and so forth, and with the Aquarian principle, it's kind of stemming to a global story. So you can begin to understand where the national story is yielding to a collective global theme, and that's partially what I'm trying to explain. And I'll be doing other videos that are going to contribute to this whole story as well. Okay, that we're in this very dynamic just sunrise to the age of Aquarius principle, and these are the dynamics at play that are really lending to it. So you kind of begin to understand some of the fabric of the cyclic process at play, the archetypal themes that stem from the planets, what historically are known as the gods, but we now refer to them more as the archetypes. When we do that, it takes on a more blueprint principle, more kind of design of existence principle, with the themes of destiny at play. And historically, classically, they're more kind of subjective, but now it's got a more global theme to it. And that's the main point I want to make. So let's continue here. And we're just going to go from 2025. It's going to take a bit here, but you can see how quickly it moves. It just takes about, a minute to go through each year. And the planets are all in their very, very dynamic motion. The moon, of course, very quick. The sun annually. Venus and Mercury are about a year cycles as well. Mars here every 2 years. The far planets, Uranus here, Neptune, Pluto, are moving much more slowly, but you will get a little glimpse that they're very closely aligned in the early degrees of each sign, okay? So there's a whole theme and video I'm going to show you about the dynamics between Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. They represent the more trans-social principle, and I do think that that's very significant to be aware of, certainly as an astrologer, looking at the larger story, not just personal horoscope perspective, but the larger collective revolutions of evolution that I've been talking about. So here we are, we're just about there at the first of the dates in 2029. We're in late 2028 here, and we're going to come to the opposition of Jupiter to Saturn, very soon here. As mentioned, there's Jupiter moving towards the opposite Saturn there. This is Jupiter, okay, it's going to retrograde again. It's 2029 already. So watch as it kind of seems to go way back, but then it starts to move quicker again. See how fast it's moving now? It goes through these sort of, it's really interesting the way planets are always moving at different speeds from our earthly perspective due to the retrograde dynamic. Because the Earth going around the Sun creates this kind of relative illusion, but it's an experiential one for us, and that's kind of the mystery of how astrology works partially. So there it is, just shy of the date there at the end of December. Remember I said December 22nd, 2029. There's the opposition point, and then that was the first of the opposition points. So I want to just bring it into this end of the decade, beginning of the next decade period, and see the three moments when, the planets come into their opposition. The first one there just occurred, and I said April 24th but we're about there. So here's the last one, and I'll leave it there as we go to the end of the year of 2030, in November 20th to be exact. I'm going to stop it right there, and we'll see the final opposition of Jupiter and Saturn. And again, this is the halfway point of the 20-year cycle in November 20th, 2030, and there'll still be 10 years to go. But it's the first half of the planets moving towards opposition that is the major dynamic period. It's very like the yang period, all the action. But then the second half, the second 10 years is more like the digestion of it, the follow through. It's true, but the follow through to the initial activation period, which is the waxing towards opposition. So there you go. That's what I've just shown you. I hope you got something out of that. It's a bit of an intro, a little fun whirlwind perspective on some of what, the astrology looks like and how it works. So thanks for being here. Watch the other videos as mentioned. You'll get a lot out of it, and watch for future videos coming that will lend an even larger contextual perspective that will prove quite exciting for you to understand. And it will be helpful as well, because it can help you, to understand there's a rhyme, reason, time, and season to it all, a plan at play, and you don't have to kind of get lost in the notion it's all random and going just crazy out of control. So you'll be able to be more centered, but others won't have that luxury, so you might be able to help them too. But when we're with all of this very, very major dynamic at play, no less than with the age of Aquarius, having its sunrise moment, and with all these major activations, like with this Jupiter-Saturn cycle, well, it's no small thing. And, humanity really is going through a birthing process from, individual nationalities to a collective global village principle in my general view and understanding. It's not specifically because I want it to be that, it's that it looks like it is that. Okay, so it's not a bias, it's not just a kind of wishful thinking dynamic or some notion I have. It's more an objective perspective on probabilities of how the revolutions of evolution and associated with the larger context of the age of Aquarius, etc., are at play, and they're very current in our times now. And we have this next 10-month period approximately to really, well, be aware and mindful, feet on the ground, and creative in our adaptation abilities to deal with the first dynamic squared process that has already begun. So there you go, and thanks for being here. And hey, I'm here for you. If you feel the need to or desire to gain more insight on your own personal destiny and how, where you are in your own cycles and how that, in a way coincides and so forth with the larger, but most importantly, knowing your own will help you navigate better through these rather complex times we're going through, and I can help you to, know what you're here to do, help you with the timing, help you through, to navigate through these rather complex times. So check it out, sunstarrastrology.com if you don't already. I do write a weekly horoscope, which you can have for free, or you can get the paid version, which has all kinds of benefits and bonuses that come with it. So thank you again for being here, and we'll see you next time.